Welcome to Calming Curiosity, where knowledge can be relaxing. In a previous episode, we explored why people got tattoos, what they meant, and how tattooing changed over thousands of years. But apparently, we barely scratched the surface, because throughout history, tattoos have served some very strange purposes. They've been used to send secret messages, prepare for nuclear war, repair the appearance of damaged eyes, and even turn livestock into art. So sit back, take a deep breath, close your eyes if you'd like, and just listen. We've all heard the expression, "when pigs fly." In the 1970s, Texas artist Andy Feehan apparently took that as a challenge. Winged pigs had been a reoccurring subject in Feehan's artwork for years when he decided to create the closest thing he could to the real thing, a pig with a pair of wings tattooed onto its sides. He bought a young Chester White pig, named him Minnesota, and then discovered, surprisingly, that finding someone willing to tattoo a pig was considerably harder than finding the pig. Tattoo artists turned him down, and even Texas A&M's veterinary school emphatically declined. Eventually, though, he found both a tattooist and veterinarian willing to participate. And in 1976, Minnesota was put under anesthesia and finally got his wings. By then, Feehan had also grown quite attached to Minnesota and was determined that his newly created work of art would never end up on someone's dinner table. He eventually gave Minnesota to eccentric millionaire and art patron Stanley Marsh III, on the condition that Minnesota would never be slaughtered. Less than 2 months later, however, Feehan received a letter saying Minnesota had died from what Marsh described as an overdose of chocolate Easter eggs and champagne. Because, well, if you're going to die. And then Marsh had Minnesota stuffed. Several years later, Feehan received an unusual request from well-known Hollywood animal trainer Ralph Helfer. Ralph's favorite uncle was turning 70. And when your wealthy uncle lives in Beverly Hills and apparently already has everything, you get him a tattooed pig. Feehan chose a young Chester White sow again, named her Artemis, and had wings tattooed onto her sides. At this point, Artemis was still young and small enough for someone to pick up, which, as it turns out, will become important later. Ralph arranged for his private plane to fly Feehan and Artemis to California, where they arrived at the uncle's lavish birthday party in a stretch limousine. With all the people in activity, Feehan worried Artemis would become too overwhelmed, so he settled her outside, where she seemed perfectly content with some hors d'oeuvres and salad. Unfortunately, one increasingly intoxicated guest decided the pig should join the party. Feehan said no. The man insisted. Eventually, Artemis was brought inside with some very clear instructions. Let her explore, don't startle her, and above all, do not pick her up. Naturally, the intoxicated guest ignored all that and began chasing her. This put Artemis into a full-blown panic. She tore through the expensive Beverly Hills home, weaving past startled party guests, until she spotted an open door beside the dining room and made a run for it. Just before she reached freedom, the man caught her and picked her up, right next to the buffet. Artemis, by this point, being thoroughly terrified, had a very unfortunate reaction. She machine-gunned the buffet. And not just the buffet. The silk-covered walls, the caterers dressed in white, and several very well-dressed guests were also caught in the line of fire. The party ended shortly thereafter. But not every unusual use for tattoos was quite so entertaining. For you baby boomers out there, do you remember the nuclear attack drills in school? Climbing under your desk? If hiding under a school desk was supposed to protect us from a nuclear bomb, those desks must have been something quite special. Or they were trying very hard to give us a false sense of security. For some American school children, however, preparing for nuclear war went considerably further. They were tattooed. In 1951 and 1952, thousands of children in parts of Indiana and Utah had their blood types tattooed onto their bodies as part of a Cold War civil defense program. The idea was to create what officials called a walking blood bank. In the event of an atomic attack, hospitals were expected to be overwhelmed with casualties and desperately short of blood. If thousands of ordinary citizens already had their blood types permanently marked on their bodies, doctors could theoretically know what blood they could receive if they were injured, or identify them as potential donors for someone else. And planners were thinking about some fairly grim details. The arm was considered as a possible location for the tattoo, but was rejected because an arm might be lost in an explosion. So the blood type was tattooed on the torso, often on the left side of the chest or above the hip. The program became known as Operation Tat Type. In Northwest Indiana, the program was carried out right in the schools. Children lined up, had their blood typed, received a small tattoo, and then went back to class. Pretty sure no one saw that being added to the curriculum. By May of 1952, around 30,000 people in Northwest Indiana had reportedly received the tattoos. But Operation Tat Type lasted less than a year. There was just one flaw in the plan. Doctors still wanted to test a person's blood before giving or receiving a transfusion. A sensible precaution that might have been worth discussing before tattooing 30,000 people. Of course, using tattoos to solve unusual problems was hardly a modern idea. More than 2,500 years ago, a Greek ruler named Histiaeus wanted to secretly encourage a revolt against the mighty Persian Empire. There was just one problem. Histiaeus was hundreds of miles away in Susa, where the Persian king Darius could keep an eye on him because he had become suspicious of his ambitions. And with the roads being watched, sending a letter saying revolt against the king seemed unwise. So Histiaeus came up with another way. He chose his most trusted enslaved man, shaved his head, tattooed the secret message directly onto the man's scalp, and waited for his hair to grow back. Once the man had enough hair to conceal the tattoo, he sent him on the long journey to deliver the message. When the messenger finally reached his destination, his head was shaved again, revealing Histiaeus' instructions to revolt against the Persian king. The uprising itself failed, but it helped set the stage for the Greco-Persian Wars and ultimately a Greek victory. It was certainly an ingenious form of encryption. Our next unusual use for tattooing moves the needle somewhere very uncomfortable. Have you ever gotten a tiny speck of dust in your eye? That irritating little grain that somehow feels roughly the size of a brick? Now imagine someone deliberately putting pigment onto your cornea. The practice of coloring damaged corneas goes back nearly 2,000 years and eventually evolved into what we now call corneal tattooing. Around 150 AD, the Greek physician Galen described treating eyes that had become white or cloudy from disease or injury. To make the damaged eye look more natural, he described cauterizing the affected area of the cornea, then applying substances containing copper to darken the white scar. And if you're wondering what they used for anesthesia, the historical description does not mention any. Effective local anesthesia for the eye wouldn't arrive for another 17 centuries. And suddenly that speck of dust doesn't seem quite so bad. Centuries later, doctors took the idea a step further. In 1869, French ophthalmologist Louis de Wecker began using India ink, a black soot-based pigment, and a groove needle to tattoo scarred corneas. And surprisingly, corneal tattooing never entirely disappeared. It's still used in certain circumstances today. Modern ophthalmologists can use specialized pigments to camouflage a damaged cornea. And in some cases, the procedure can reduce excessive light and glare caused by defects of the iris. So while tattooing an eye may sound like a modern form of body art, doctors got there first. And that brings us to our last story. After an episode filled with tattoos used to hide secret messages, prepare children for nuclear war, make pigs figuratively fly, and even repair the appearance of damaged eyes, it seems only fitting to finish with someone who used tattoos for the most traditional reason of all. He simply really, really liked them. Lucky Diamond Rich, born Gregory Paul McLaren in New Zealand, is recognized by Guinness World Records as the most tattooed man in the world. And when Guinness says most tattooed, they mean it. His eyelids are tattooed, inside his ears, between his toes, even his gums. At which point most people would probably conclude that the project was finished. Lucky did not. After reaching 100% coverage, he began tattooing over the tattoos. Much of his original artwork was covered with solid black ink. Then he began adding white designs over the black, and later adding color on top of that. Guinness has described this second layer as taking his tattoo coverage toward 200%, because apparently, once you run out of skin, you just start over. And despite his appearance, tattooing isn't even his only claim to fame. Lucky is a performance artist whose acts have included sword swallowing, juggling, and riding a 10-foot unicycle, because one unusual hobby wasn't enough. And with that, we've come to the end of today's episode. If you enjoyed today's calming journey, I would be grateful if you liked and subscribed. It is completely free and truly helps support the channel so I can keep creating and sharing these stories with you. And also, before you go, I would love to hear which of today's stories surprised you the most. So, if anyone ever tells you pigs can't fly, apparently they just haven't met the right tattoo artist. Until next time, stay calm and curious.